Okay, so we're going to work on DSMA 2, which is ratios, percents, fractions, and decimals. It's very important in statistics that we can switch back and forth between percents and decimals. Not so much fractions. Fractions, we're going to more use our calculator, but the percents and decimals, we have to be able to switch back and forth. And then rounding, of course, which is going to be another section. All right, here's our decimal place chart. Our decimal point is right in the middle here. On the right-hand side, we have tenths, hundredths, thousands. This is going to make a lot more sense when I start looking at the fractions, because what happens is we divide by 10, or we divide by 100, we divide by 1,000. There's no oneths. If your elementary school teacher told you that, she was wrong. There's no oneths. So on that side, we start with tenths, we go to hundredths and thousandths. And remember that TH is in there. Okay, on the left-hand side, there we have ones. So we have ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. We go all the way up to millions, billions, trillions. We've been hearing all about billions and trillions lately on the news. So that is to the left of the decimal place, but to the right of the decimal place is where we have to be really careful in statistics. Okay, so let's take a look here. There are lots of different ways to switch from decimal to percentages. There's moving the decimal point, which is what I like. There's either multiplying by 100 or dividing by 100. You can set up a ratio. So however you were taught is awesome, but I'm going to stick with just one way to not confuse people too much. Okay, so we are moving, on this slide, we are moving from decimal to percentage. So if they gave me 0.2, so that's a decimal. If you want to think about fractions already, that would be 2 over 10. Let's not go there yet. If we want to change this to a percent, we have to move the decimal place 2 spots. Well, by moving it 2 spots, we have to fill in with a 0. So it is now 20%. It has to have the percent sign though. So we can't just like move decimals without doing anything else. So by moving that decimal 2 like that, you have to now change it to a percent. You also could multiply by 100 if you learned that way, go for it. Okay, our next one is 0.02. So again, we're going to move 2 decimal places over, and that leaves us with 2%. Don't forget the percent. All right, the next one is 2.22. That's the decimal. And so if we move 2 places, we get 222%. I know that seems crazy, but those really are percents. You're hearing those in the news right now, unfortunately. All right, and then finally on the bottom, we have 0.0002. When we move 2 decimal places, we still have what looks like a decimal. It is, but it has now become a percent. It's just a very, very tiny percent. But it's very important that the percent sign is still there. All right, so they gave me a decimal, and they want me to change this to a percent. So I'm going to go ahead and move my decimal 2 over. That gives me 28%. Again, I have to have that percent. Now in my stat lab, they're going to put the percent on the outside here, and you're only going to type the 28 on the inside. But if you were doing this on a piece of paper, you'd have to have that percent. All right, so we have 0.8655. This is the given decimal, and we want to express this as a percent. So again, we're going to move our decimal place 2 to the right. That's going to give us 86. We still take everything else though, 86.55%. And that's what's going to go in our box. Okay, so now we're going to go the other way. They're going to give us a percent, and we need to write it as a decimal. Okay, so if you like the moving the decimal places, we're actually going to move to the left this time, and we have to drop the percent. And so that's important. We have to drop the percent sign. If you like to do the dividing by 100, that's great. Just divide by 100. But again, you have to drop the percent. So if I have 20%, I'm going to start with the decimal point. Oh, let me do it green. I'm going to start with the decimal point right here. And this time I'm going to go to the left. So I'm going to do the opposite of what I did on the last few slides. But I also have to, I'm able to drop that 0 in the end. It's not wrong to put 0.20. But if there's zeros on the right-hand side, you can drop those. But I also have to drop the percent. Notice I don't have the percent sign anymore. Okay, let's try one more, and then I'll let you guys look at that chart. So we have 20%. All right, so let's start on this side. Our decimal is actually after the 2, and we need to move it to the left 2. So we are going to have to fill in with a 0. Okay, this is important. Okay, so I now have 0.02. It would be wrong if I only put 0.2 because I had to move 2 decimal places. I have to have that leading 0. Now, if you're going into a health field, it's also very important that you put a 0 in front. I try very hard to do that because us engineers drop that a lot of times, which is not good if you are in the health field, because if I drop it, that you could, let's say a doctor gives you 0.02 that looks like this, and you don't notice that the decimal's to the left of the 0, and you actually give them 0.2, whatever it is, milliliters of a drug, you could really hurt somebody. So it's very important that we put that leading 0. Okay, so let's go the other direction. So they gave me a percent, 45%, and they want me to change this to a decimal. So don't forget the decimal point is right here after the 5, and I need to move to the left 2. So I now have 0. This little stylus will not let me do a point. 0.45, and drop the percent sign. As soon as we move the decimal, we don't have that percent sign anymore. And so the decimal is 0.45. If this bothers you, you can, or it's hard to remember, you can actually divide by 100. And if you put that in your calculator, you'll get the same thing. You'll get 0.45. All right, we have 58.03%. We want to change this to a decimal. So we're going to start with our percent. We're going to move to the left 2 tick marks. So now we have 0.5803. Still grab everything else because we want to be precise. And then drop the percent because you have now switched it to a decimal. All right, so this chart is just showing you kind of the relationship before we get to fractions here. 0.1 is the same as 10%. We know these two columns. We've been working on this. 0.2 is 20%. If you come all the way down, 0.5 is 50%. Okay, now we're going to work a little more on this in part 2. But what happens here is 0.1 is actually 1 over 10 because the 1 is in the 10th spot, right? And so 0.2 is actually 2 over 10. Again, we would reduce that normally, but for now we're going to leave that be. All right, we also, if we wanted to, 0.1 is 0.10, right? Technically. And so now I'm in the 100th spot, and so I could do 10 over 100, and that's where I get my percent from, my 10%. I don't think we're going to do it that way, but this is just a good visual for you. for moving around. We're going to stick with going from a decimal to a fraction. It's a lot easier.